This is the last major battle of the Revolutionary War. This is it. This is the culmination of everything that Washington has been fighting for. Washington knew from the very, very beginning that beating the British at their own game, actually crippling the British, and truly winning a war wasn't really an option. He was going to have to fight a long, drawn out war and make this war so very expensive that the British just give up. I mean, well, why are we fighting in the first place? The British wanted to tax the 13 colonies because the British Empire was broke. They had spent too much money fighting the 7 Years' War. They had spent too much money fighting the French and Indian War. So if you could just bleed them of a little bit more money, a little bit more time, cause them a little bit more embarrassment, eventually it may just not be worth it to them anymore. Yorktown is what finally made the British go, this isn't worth it anymore. Just let the colonies go. This is Yorktown. This is the last major battle of the American Revolutionary War. It was fought October 14th, 1781. In the fall of 1781, a combined American force of colonial and French troops laid siege to the British Army at Yorktown, Virginia. This army was led by George Washington and French General Comte de Rochambeau. They began their final attack on October 14th, capturing 2 British defenses and leading to the surrender just days later of British General Lord Cornwallis and nearly 9,000 troops. Yorktown proved to be the final battle of the American Revolution, and the British, after this, began peace negotiations shortly after the American victory. When Charles, Lord Cornwallis, the British commander in the South, so he's in the southern colonies, he was the British general in charge of the southern colonies. During the American Revolutionary War, he retreated to Yorktown Peninsula in June of 1781 to rest and re-equip his battered army. George Washington was also outside New York, preparing an assault on that British-held city with the help of 4,000 French expeditionary force. So there are 4,000 men in a French expeditionary force. That would be an army being sent to another place. So a French expeditionary force would be a French army they're sending to fight in another country. The American Expeditionary Force, we've actually done this before. That's exactly what we called our army in World War I, because we were sending an army over to Europe to help fight in World War I. So an expeditionary force is an army you're sending to another country. So a 4,000-man French expeditionary force, along with George Washington's army. Now, the French was commanded by the Count of Rochambeau. 3 days after losing 2 important defensive locations, Alexander Hamilton led a quiet night attack using only bayonets to win one of these locations. The French took the other one. These redoubts, as they were known, were small fortified. You see right there. It's right there. These were small fortifications outside the major fortifications at Yorktown. And they were supposed to be like, you can't put cannons too close to Yorktown to fire on Yorktown, or else these redoubts will shoot you. And if you attack the redoubts, you're close enough that the cannons at Yorktown can help them. So it's very dangerous to go attack there. The French attacked one of them, and Alexander Hamilton led an extremely daring night raid where he told his men, he's like, all right, look, we have to be very quiet. So what we're going to do is we're going to use a trick the British used to use on us at the very beginning of the war. We're not even going to load our weapons. We're just going to put our bayonets on the end. We're going to go up very quietly, and we're just going to spear them like we're carrying spears. We're going to use our guns like spears. So it's very dangerous. But they climbed over the redoubts and they took them. They managed to take them. It was very quiet at the middle of the night. So because of this, Cornwallis was forced to surrender. As his men marched out to stack their guns, their bands played the song, "The World Turned Upside Down." Because to them, the fact that they could lose to the colonials was the world turning upside down. In London, when Prime Minister Lord North, remember, Prime Minister of England is basically the same thing today as the President of the United States. When Prime Minister Lord North heard the news, he cried, "Oh God, it's all over." And so it was. Now, a lot of people use that quote out of context and they say, well, oh, he meant that um, the Revolutionary War is over and that we've lost the colonies. And it did mean that. But he was actually talking about how the entire British Empire, because Britain owned colonies all over the world. And he thought that if they lost any one colony, all the others would all decide to just up and bail. And that was not necessarily true. Most of the colonies actually were quite content being, well, okay, India, not fair to say that about them, but most of the colonies were relatively content staying part of the British Empire because of the economic benefits it provided them. Um, the 13 colonies was over with, though, for the British. It was no longer the 13 colonies, it's now the United States of America. Uh, Afterwards, you've got Cornwallis refused to come out and present his sword to George Washington. Traditionally, the losing general would go meet the winning general and present his sword and say, "I have lost. Here's my sword," in a small little ceremony. Cornwallis was like, "This is beneath me. I'm not doing that." So he sent one of his aides to do it, and this aide still didn't want to give the sword to Washington. So he looked at the French general Rochambeau and was going to give the sword to him. And one of Washington's aides saw what was about to happen, and he spoke French. So he told Rochambeau that this was about to happen. It was going to be an intentional insult to Washington. This British aide was going to give Cornwallis's sword to the French general, not to Washington, the American. And Rochambeau just pointed away at Washington. That's, give the sword to him. No, give the sword to Washington. And Washington, whenever the aide finally brought the sword to give it to Washington, Washington pointed to one of his aides, one of his secretaries, and said, "No, give the sword to him. I don't want it," because he knew what was going on. And, the secretary eventually gave the sword back to Cornwallis. So Cornwallis ended up not even having to give his sword away at all. I'm too good for this. I can't bear to have lost to the colonials. Ugh. So very haughty, very better than thou. So, this is the last major battle. Top question: what major naval battle caused Yorktown to even be possible? If you said Battle of the Chesapeake, you would be correct. I hope you're enjoying yourself. I hope you're learning. Until next time.